Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you've had a good day. We've just got a few minutes before we start the webinar, and whilst you wait, we would really appreciate it if you could complete the opening poll. If you'd like to share some details of where you've come from, I know that we always appreciate that in the chat, for people to say hello and how everybody is. I hope you're taking the opportunity to have maybe a cup of tea or a hot drink at the end of a busy day, and to get settled to enjoy the webinar this afternoon. We will have some questions and some time for reflection, so that you can share as the presentation progresses. Okay, everyone, at this point it's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. So welcome to the third in our series of webinars working with parents, carers and families with a focus on transition in all its forms. Now, we're fortunate this afternoon to have two keynote speakers with a depth of expertise, both from a parental and a professional perspective. So firstly, we have Ros Luff, who is a parent, former school governor for SEN, and describes herself as a SEND advocate. Her youngest child is autistic, and she has experience of both mainstream and specialist settings. Ros has been involved with parent-carer forums for over 10 years. She has seen the SEN system from the SEN Pathfinder, Children and Families Act and implementation. And she's hoping to inform the SEND review through NNPCF. In addition, we have Rebecca Tranter. Rebecca is an experienced lead trainer for the Autism Education Trust and strategic partner for the Southwest Schools Programme. Alongside an experienced SEN teacher, she's a specialist leader of education and a member of many local advisory and strategic groups. And Becca leads the specialist autism support services across Bath and North East Somerset. So I'm going to stop sharing this introduction and just leave one slide which has a few of the protocols about our next slide, about the webinar. I know that many of you on the call this afternoon have attended other webinars and you are well aware of these. So I'll just give you a minute to read them. And then without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Rebecca. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen now so I can share myself and Ros's presentation for you all as well. Okay, so in terms of our session today, thank you for the introduction, Erica. We're going to look first at different types of transition and how professionals and parents can work together to best support our children and young people. So firstly, we're going to talk about soft transitions, and these are the terms that we've used in terms of transitions that are happening throughout the day or across the week, any transitions that may heighten anxiety for some of our children and young people, but they may not be fully recognised by staff or by their peers, or some of those transitions that are noticed. Then we're going to look at planned or known transitions, so those transitions that we are preparing for every day at school and at home that we know are coming, those more significant occasions. And then what we've referred to as curveballs, so unexpected transitions and how we can work together, professionals and families, to support children during these times. We'll then share some key tools and strategies with the focus of reducing anxiety. And also then we're going to look at the one-page profile and how we can engage with parents and carers and professionals on the journey to developing a one-page profile. And then we will end with a question and answer session. So I'm going to hand over to Ros for the first section.
Hello everyone. So I'm going to start with talking about soft transitions, which is a catch-all term we're using here to cover those changes that may impact our SEND pupils more than the rest of the peer group. Any change can be a transition, so from changing clocks, coming back from holiday, moving from class to class or lesson to lesson. For some, there may be sensory issues that impact on top of all of that. Again, the impact of sensory processing issues may not be well understood. Things such as food smells in a canteen, going into a noisy environment, bright lights, etc., can be very subtle. It can be very subtle, such as a smell of different washing powder or other perfumes, or hearing people that are talking in another classroom through the wall. So for our SEND pupils, sometimes the impacts are really quite high. Also, there's a host of sensory difficulties from things such as recognising the need to go to the toilet or fixating on a wobbly tooth. All of these may impact or create barriers for that pupil transitioning onto the next task or activity. Those interested in knowing a little bit more about sensory issues and the environmental impacts, it could be worth following a link to a report called It's Not Rocket Science, which was compiled by the National Development Team for Inclusion. We'll send out all the links after the presentation. Whilst this report was written around the sensory issues for those who are long-term inpatient in units, there's an awful lot of synergy with the school environment, so worth taking a look. Becca, would you like to take on the next slide?
Lovely. So we're going to think about the first transition of the day. And one of the things that myself and Ros were talking about, prior to this webinar, was how any transition between activities or environments, however small that transition may be perceived to be, it can cause significant anxiety for our young people with SEND. So if we think about what transitions our pupils or children may already have experienced prior to arriving at school, this could be the process of waking up. Many of our children with SEND may have had disturbed night's sleep. They may be waking up tired, waking up experiencing something internally that is causing them anxiety. Getting dressed, if I think of many of the autistic children that I've worked with, the process of getting dressed and accepting those sensory differences, things that they like, things that they don't like, textures on their skin, the process of getting dressed can be really stressful. And many of our young people require an order to get dressed in, or a schedule that they can follow. Having breakfast, again, selecting what to eat, what to drink, making decisions at that time, and the morning routine or the journey to school. All of those transitions can be seen, by some who aren't necessarily taking note of these occasions as quite insignificant. But for our children and our young people with SEND, these transitions setting up for the beginning of the day can be really significant, and is so important to think what support we can put in place at that point. So we just wanted to give you the opportunity to have a think. How can professionals and parents work together to ensure that that transition into school, that those transitions at the very first part of the day are successful? And we'd like to invite you to use the chat box to share your thoughts.
I'm keeping a close eye on the chat box, and I can't see any comments at the moment, but maybe people need, we've got, thank you, Mary. Mary has said to communicate.
Absolutely.
From Kat has talked about good, effective and quick communication systems. Ben has talked about pre-agreed norms. Tanya talks about preparation. And I think we're there. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Rebecca, for you to comment on that.
Thank you for those examples. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And in terms of that, that communication, that very first point, making sure that you're considering, for one, how your young person communicates, how your child communicates, that's really essential. So not only the communication between, the home setting and the school, but how your young person can be involved in communicating their needs and experiences as well. And I would say at this point, in terms of communication, listening and valuing your parents. We're going to talk about this throughout the training, but from a perspective of school staff and education professionals, we say that the parents are the absolute experts when it comes to their children. So we absolutely must listen to what your parents are communicating, what they're sharing with you, particularly when it comes to a transition point such as this one. So thank you for all of those contributions. I just noticed another one, arrangements were being picked up and photographs to help understand. So thanks for those contributions as well. Again, completely agree. Photos and symbols, things that your pupils can relate to support them to understand what's happening now and next are really key. And again, communicating those arrangements. And we're going to look at that a little bit more as we go through. Thank you. So some of the things that come to mind for both myself and Ros, transitions within the school day. So arriving and leaving school. Again, as mentioned in the chat box, how you can prepare your child or young person to feel comfortable arriving, and that settling in process is absolutely key. So if you think about the morning routine and arriving at school, using social stories. So we reference them later on, but social stories are developed by Carol Gray. You can also use social scripts. So that's definitely something to have a look into. And their way of understanding and sharing with your child or young person what's happening now, what's happening next, how they might respond to a situation, and what's in place to help them, who they can go to for support. So they're really great and useful at preparing a young person for knowing what's going to happen in advance of that thing happening. Visual timetables, so representing something visually. It could be in the form of a timetable or a schedule, using a photograph or symbols, or words if your child or young person is that little bit older. It's just a way of making it very clear what's happening throughout the day, what that process involves, and what they're expected to do at certain points. And it takes away some of that anxiety of wondering what's going to happen next, and what it means for them. Trusted adults. So making sure when they arrive at school that you've got that trusted adult there to greet them, and that if needs be that they've got some time with that adult to settle. It could be that many of our young people will go to their education settings and they may need 5 or 10 minutes outside on the playground to support that transition between the home and the school environment, or some time to spend in the library or in the corner of the classroom with a book or with a comforting object or with a sensory regulator. Something that makes them feel comfortable. And that's why many of our young children in early year settings or in primary settings often bring something in from home that's a real comfort for them, so that they can have that item available to support that transition into school. And again, find out the parents' experiences. So if you're an education professional, what are your parents telling you works for them in terms of when they're going somewhere new with their child, when they're going to a new setting or trying something different? What is helping the family to reassure that child and help them to understand what's happening, and again valuing that experience. And leaving school, absolutely the same applies. Our children can experience a huge buildup of anxiety within the school day, and not always show it to professionals. Some of our young children with SEND can be very good at masking how they're feeling, and not feeling comfortable to necessarily share those worries or concerns. And they can finally get to the end of the school day and it's that fizzy Coke bottle effect, all of their anxiety is built up and up and up without an outlet, and they go home to an environment where they feel safe and comfortable and let all of those feelings and emotions out. So in terms of preparing for leaving school, there was a nice example that Ros gave. We were talking about a young person who was allowed some time to sit on a bench before they were then transitioning to get home. Again, it's time to process, and it's time to accept what's happening and allow your body to respond to the changes between one environment to another. Thinking about break times and lunch times, it's really important that we're preparing our SEND pupils for unstructured times. So any period of time, it could be going out onto the playground, it could be going to a break space, it could be going into the lunch hall. How can you structure your unstructured times to make them more predictable for our children? Using things like choosing boards, so being able to have activities available for them to select, showing them what's on offer and giving them ideas for what they can do and fill that unstructured time with. And things like lunchtime clubs, so giving your children opportunities to mix with other children with shared interests, chance to relate, chance to celebrate what they do really well, what they're really good at, what they enjoy, and again, bring some of that positivity for your pupils as well. So it's a way, again, of structuring times which may appear to lack structure. Assemblies are something to really consider within a school and a learning environment. So arriving early to assemblies, we've got to think about the potential sensory overload that some of our children may be experiencing. And they may go from a relatively quiet, predictable classroom to going into a really busy school hall with all sorts of other sensory things that are going on, and children that they may not be used to spending time with, or not knowing what the speaker is going to present at the front of the hall. So is it useful for that young person to arrive early and to be in that space ready for when the other children start to come in and get used to the space, get used to putting those regulation strategies in place? The same comes into navigating corridors and being really careful to avoid that busy corridor environments where they may be bumping into other children or brushing shoulders with other children. And this is all about every child with SEND. But if I think about some of the autistic children that I have worked with and do work with, they can describe the experience of bumping into somebody or brushing past somebody as physically painful, almost like an electric current. So it's bearing in mind all of that sensory profile and what they are experiencing in terms of touch and the busyness of that environment, and how can you reduce that for them? Can they leave early? Can they navigate the corridors at a quieter time or in a smaller group? And the same with lining up in the classroom. Can they line up in a certain place at the beginning or the end of the line, or in a smaller group? So just be really mindful of that sensory overload. When thinking about creative or extracurricular activities, again, anything that is slightly more free, slightly more opportunity to be creative, they are fantastic for our students all to experience, but they may need to be structured a little bit more. So consider using now and next, first or then. So drawing on a whiteboard what's happening now and then what's happening next, or writing it down, or breaking your tasks up into different sections for them. And consider the social expectations as well. When you're asking your children or young people to split up into groups or to work with a peer or do a paired activity, what are the social expectations within that, and how can you support them to know how to engage and work with others? When it comes to your classroom environment, think about where your young person is sitting. Are they sitting in the same place for every lesson? And if not, is this something that would maybe reduce their anxiety? Some of our young people would respond really well to having a workstation or a space that is their own, somewhere that they know they can go and they've got the resources and the space that they need, including some regulators for them as well. And consider their sensory profile. So each of your learners will have a different, unique sensory profile. So it's really looking beneath the surface and unpicking what are they experiencing, what do they need to feel safe and secure in that learning environment to therefore reduce their anxiety. And one tip that I always give to staff that I'm training is, where possible, put yourself in that young person's shoes. And we're not talking metaphorically, we're not talking about visualizing what that experience is like, but where possible, find an opportunity for your young person to go and do something different or leave the classroom and go and sit in their space and sit amongst their peers and do the activity that you're asking them to do. And think, what do you notice? You know, do they notice that the person very close to them is always tapping their pencil, or the person in front and to the left is swinging on their chair? Or are they so close to the corridor that they're distracted by the noise of people walking past? And by putting yourself in that position, you will notice things that you perhaps wouldn't notice from purely observing your child. When it comes to getting changed for PE, again, consider the busyness of changing rooms and classrooms. Do they need a visual schedule to help them with knowing in what order to change their clothes? Do they need a labelled peg where all of their clothes can go? So changing for PE and swimming, consider that environment as well, and also the insecurities that some of our children may feel. You know, do they need a more private environment? Are they feeling self-conscious, and what can you do to make them feel safe and comfortable? When it comes to going to the toilet, think about their internal needs. So many of our young children with SEND, many of our children with SEND find it difficult to communicate or recognise how they're feeling internally. So they may not understand what it feels like to be hot or cold or hungry or tired or stressed or have a tummy ache or need to go to the toilet. So they will need us to start noticing those signs and recognising those for them and supporting them to know what that means for them and what they need to do next. Make sure that break cards are available, so they've got a way of communicating with you when they need to have one of their internal needs met. And for many of our children, they may feel quite self-conscious about asking to go to the toilet, for example. So could they have a more subtle system? For example, I've used in the past coloured pencils where they can push a green or an orange or a red coloured pencil to the end of their desk to indicate whether or not they need to leave the room, whether they need a break, whether they need to go to the toilet, and making sure that they have whichever means to communicate for that. Again, support with hygiene, understanding how to access hygiene routines and hand washing schedules, and make sure that when you're thinking about your sensory environment, are they comfortable using your class toilets? Or do they need to maybe think about another space that they can go? Or do they need to access the toilet at a quieter time when it's not busy with other students? And moving around the school. So using things like transition songs can be really helpful. Often we'll associate these with our younger children, but it can also be really helpful for our older students who will start to associate a song with moving from one activity to another. It could be a tidy up song, or a going to lunch song, or a going out to play song, or a collecting your resources song, or a chant or a rap, something that they can start to associate with expecting a transition coming. Using those now and next strategies, as we've mentioned, and buddy systems, having peers that really understand your young person as well as your team and your staff members do in school. Do they have trusted peer relationships that can support them with navigating transitions? And things like an alert prior to the school bell. So if you're in the middle of a lesson, you might, or come to the end of a lesson, as a practitioner in a school setting, you may predict when that bell is coming and you're ready for it. You've already been taking account of those signals to know how much time you've got left, what's happened within the day. A young person may not be expecting that sound, and it can be really shocking for them, and it can throw them off what they're trying to get ready to do. So could you think about a silent bell, or replacing your bell with something like a calm, soothing sound or a piece of music, something that would make them feel more comfortable and not quite so taken aback by a sudden noise or movement. So when thinking about all transitions, and I know we're going to break those down a bit further, but all transitions, think about your visual timetables. So making these interactive, making sure that your children are being encouraged to interact with the timetables that you're displaying. So on the right of the screen, you can see a visual example of a visual timetable. This is taken from my own setting at Fossway School, where you can see we use the same symbol processes throughout the school. So whether your young child is in reception or you have a teenager in the secondary part of the school, we will all be using the same system. So that is something that is consistent for them. And we interact with our timetables throughout the school day. So, for example, you may do a hello song in the morning or a register. When that's finished, you will say, hello has finished. You'll take it off the timetable. Now it's time for phonics. And each time you finish an activity, make sure you are actively engaging with that timetable, removing the symbol and moving on to the next one so they can see the progression throughout the day. It's really helpful to have a surprise symbol, something that indicates that a change is going to happen. So you may have a surprise symbol when you've got something occurring like a school trip, or you've got a change of teacher in that day that you weren't expecting, a supply member of staff. And you can say, actually, there is a surprise, but that's okay, because your young person will get used to seeing that symbol and know that they're going to be reassured about what that surprise is. And a really good idea is to have that surprise followed with a social story or a description of what's happening and why, so that your young person can really understand. And on the left, you can see an example of a now and next board. So on the next, we may have something like tasks. So that could be independent work or study. And the next is choosing time. It's that reward. It's that thing that they can look forward to. And it's using that language of now and next throughout the day to make that process really clear. And use pictures, signs or symbols to support all of the above. Again, make sure your communication is at the right level for your students and get on the right level to meet their communication needs. So if they're communicating verbally, you can use verbal language to respond. If they require the use of signs or symbols or a textbook to communicate, make sure that you're reinforcing your language visually as well. And recognise that some pupils may need photographs as well. So again, what extra strategies can you put in place? And with the photographs, you may need to communicate really often with your young person's family to say, what you're using at home, what communication strategy are you using? And can we bring this into the school environment and vice versa? So again, your communication strategies are absolutely the same, whether you're in the home environment or the school environment. And think about structure and preparation. So that is absolutely key for all changes and transitions. Use things like timers. There could be a sensory timer or a digital timer on your whiteboard to indicate the passing of time, to help your young person know how much time they've got left in activity, when they need to start preparing themselves to move on, and always provide warning for upcoming transitions where you're able to do so, and allow your young people additional processing time. And some of the young people that I've worked with will require 10-15 seconds of additional processing time to be able to understand and then follow and process an instruction. And again, it's about working with your families to understand how much processing time do they need in their home environment. What are the strategies that are used there? Do they use timers? Do they use verbal warnings? What works for the family? And you can replicate that in school. And that's another reference at the bottom to Carol Gray's social stories, which I'd really recommend you have a look at for both environments. And I've written there, social scripts, social stories are for the home environment too. So if you're writing a social story to help prepare a young person in your school setting, make sure you're sending that social story home and you're having some time with families to explain what the concept is, how they can use it as well. And vice versa, if a young person needs a social story at home, can that be shared in school to help reinforce that message and ensure that you're both working together to support your young person? And this is just a quote which it's from the Autism Education Trust, so it's about an autistic pupil. However, it is absolutely relevant for our children with SEND. And what we say is that any strategy that you're putting in place for a young person with autism will only support any other young person within your classroom, any other area of this SEND. There's nothing that's going to be of any detriment, because we need to think about how understanding what's happening now and next will reduce that frustration and anxiety and anger that your young people with SEND may be experiencing. And autistic pupils, any young person with SEND, can find change difficult, but not impossible. Given warning and keeping routines can help to reduce levels of anxiety. And that ultimately is what we need to be aiming for within our schools, is how can we reduce those levels of anxiety, make our young people feel more comfortable, and know that those same strategies are in place at home and in the school environment to really meet their sensory needs. I'm just going to hand back over to Ros to talk about planned and known transitions.
Thank you, Becca. So yeah, in early years education, there are approaches such as the now and next boards, or right style dance exercises, which help children prepare for a next step. For those not familiar with right dance, these help strengthen the hands holding pencil, pen or paintbrush. But these approaches can still be useful for older SEND pupils and actually beneficial for everybody. It's useful to have movement breaks and stretching. And there are age-appropriate hand and finger exercises available free online to look at. I've got an example to share about how a teacher helped reduce the anxiety for a young person who was returning from school after the holidays. And the teacher knew that the pupil found it really daunting to enter that school building. So they sent a postcard ahead to say they hoped the pupil had a good break and that they were looking forward to having him back in class. And this seemingly small gesture helped bolster the confidence of that young person Just knowing that there was someone inside the building that wanted to see them really helped for them to transition from the outside into the school. And that can be just as effective with a phone call, a text, email. And I'd advocate working out with parents and young people on the best way to share snippets of information or comments. Because the small things, it's something just as simple as a road diversion or a button coming off a shirt, can impact on the whole day for some pupils we've sent. If you move on to the next one, you've moved it already. So a teacher in a large class might actually pick up on a pupil's high anxiety through their body language, reactions or behaviours. However, it's not always possible to determine what's causing those. A pupil may not open up or not be ready to open up and could become increasingly agitated if pressed. And this is where parents may be able to help teachers to see what the issue was. They can look at a time when the child is much calmer and see if there's anything that could be put in place to prevent a future struggle, similar struggle. And they'll know how best to approach talking about these issues with their child, and the child much more likely to open up once they've had time to think about things. Next slide, please, Becca. Sorry. So where possible, it's really helpful to forewarn of any issues that are likely to impact on that pupil, but it can still be helpful to share retrospectively. And this also can help inform the assess, plan, do, review cycle if you're looking for whether it needs to be other provision for the child, other resources. And I think it's key to include the parents and, where possible, the pupil in all discussions around the assess, plan, do, review cycle, because then they can really help personalise it. Where a pupil's involved, they're more likely to take ownership of that plan. Parents can give insights on the best way to deliver some of the approaches, what might work, what more importantly might not work. And often it can be those very small things that make the difference. For example, a pupil may feel less stressed if they're sitting in a chair close to a wall, so no one sitting behind them or walking behind them. It's helpful also to develop a very quick way of two-way contact with parents and or the pupil. Remember to share some positive messages too, but try to avoid that end of day during pick-up time, which can be highly stressful for everybody and not constructive for sharing ideas. So we're going to have a little reflection question. I want you to consider, how do you currently have contact with parents, and how can those interactions be used to include parents in that PDR cycle?
We haven't got any questions yet, any comments yet, Ros, but I was visiting a school on Friday, and a teacher within the resource space in the school, she had an allocated time on a Friday afternoon for contact with parents. But what she was doing, obviously because of COVID restrictions, she was doing that remotely. But every so often, she was actually inviting the parent into school to actually celebrate some of the work that the child had completed with the child and the parent in school, which I thought was a really lovely idea and a positive response as well.
It is good to get that sort of repartee between yourselves when you hear the positive messages as well. It just helps build up a trust and a relationship where you can feel free to share things and share and be open about the not so good aspects of SEND.
And we've got some comments from Michelle, who's saying face-to-face phone calls, termly review meetings, Senko emails so parents can contact direct. So a lot going on in Michelle's school.
It's good to hear.
Then from Ben, we've got mostly email, phone calls, some letters, etc., and meetings on occasions, as and when it allows. Thank you, Ben.
And I think also it might be useful to have things like the odd coffee morning around a particular theme, where parents can share together with staff in a more neutral way. So it's not about their child, it's about how their children present, the collective group present. That can be quite helpful.
Thank you. I think we've got all the comments now, Ros, so when you're ready to move on. Oh, we've got one more from Tanya, and they do have regular themed coffee mornings, as you mentioned, which is great.
It's great. It's to help people link up, because other SEND families don't necessarily know each other, and there's an awful lot that can come out of peer support. So the set transitions, many transitions that can be anticipated and planned for, and those include the change of year group, change of school, school trips. Some of our parent care reforms have helped produce guides for families, and there's also charities that have provided useful tips and tools. The important thing to recognise is that all of this support works best when they're personalised around the pupil. Parents are key to helping schools personalise these, so sort of build on those relationships. Moving on through the year groups, we'll need extra planning for SEND pupils. It's helpful to include parents at the earliest possible point in knowing who the next teaching staff are. Try an individual meet the teacher session, preferably not during an open evening melee. And that meeting can be used to share what's the best way to communicate, maybe any anxieties the pupil has around changes, etc. So really think about those planning. With key stages changes, it's important to hold those discussions with parents prior to any key stage change. Try holding familiarisation visits or walkthrough videos, especially if they're changing setting, and that can help give a picture of the environment and the school day for the pupil. Pupil may share with their parent how difficult they find it to walk through crowds of other pupils, whereas they may not share that with the teacher. The parent and teacher are more likely to be able to think through what might make a reasonable adjustment for that, whereas the pupil wouldn't necessarily. For instance, use a different route, be allowed to go on a different corridor, or go earlier or later than the others without any kind of penalty. And allow as much time as possible to lead up to any change. This gives families a chance to work through what might cause issues and plan with staff how to mitigate them. So the next page, next slide, please. So with a change of school, this is a massive thing for our SEND pupils, and it needs to be planned as early as possible. It'd be useful to suggest to parents that they visit open days a year before the expected transition. That gives them an opportunity to narrow down their choices and scheduling meetings with key people rather than try to rush it all in a few weeks when they need to meet a deadline for the local authority. Once a parent's got a first choice in mind, I'd suggest it's worth those parents meeting with the school SENCO, inclusion leads, and if at all possible, the teaching staff for the receiving year group. Where the pupil's moving from one school to another, it'd also be helpful to have a member of the current school attend. And obviously, time pressures and everything, that may not be possible. So I think it'd be helpful to encourage the parent to consider what questions might be important to ask and have an up-to-date one-page profile to hand, which Becca's already mentioned, and she'll give a lot more detail about how some of those work. And the current school is really useful and helpful in helping parents to update this, keep this up to date. Next slide, please. I've shared a link here, again, you'll get them at the end of the session, which is a useful tool for helping pupils moving from year 6 to 7. This is aimed at all pupils, but it can be really helpful to work through this guide together with the SEND pupils, really considering things such as the bus routes to get to the school, any little change. And it helps them to be thinking about what that change may look like, to be asking those questions. Also, there's the Whole School Send Ask, Listen, Do leaflet on making a guide to making conversations count for all families. I think this is a really useful document which helps prompt parents on questions that it might be useful for them to ask with a new setting. Also, as a school, you could look at that leaflet and use it as a self-reflection tool and consider how you would respond if you was asked any of those questions. Parents will need to look at SEND policies and other relevant ones such as uniform, behaviour, etc., and consider if any of these may pose a difficulty for their child. Again, talk with the school, see what can be possible, what reasonable adjustments can be put in place. Honest and frank conversations are crucial, and it's always best to try and problem solve together to try and preempt any potential issues. I just have a little note on school trips here. School trips are another area where SEND pupils appreciate as much preparation as possible. So when sharing a planned itinerary, try sharing these with parents in advance. Some SEND pupils will need to have more detailed information than their peer group. It might be that they need pictures or an easy read format. There's examples of the type of extra info to include, to have all ambiguity removed from that information. So give some rough timings where you can, what the facility is like, the changing room, maybe you've got some pictures of those, toilets, canteens, you know, are there alternatives to using the ones that everybody else is using? Will extra staff be needed to support them today? Talk to a parent about, you know, the kind of things that may cause an issue for that SEND pupil, because they just can't necessarily cope and take things in their stride as other pupils will. So we've got another reflection moment, and do you have any examples of working with parents on set transitions that you could share with others?
If you have any links that you could put in the chat, then do please put those in. I know that Francesca's already put the link in to the Ask, Listen, Do leaflet, and there will be further details on that at the end. So as we progress through, if anybody knows of any good transition information that we can share, then please add the information to the chat. I don't think we've got anything in the chat at the moment. So I think if we carry on, Ros, and I'll just keep an eye on the chat, okay?
Lovely. Okay, next slide, please. Has gone all red, look like the devil here. So, coping with curveballs. Life is full of curveballs, and we all know recent years the school community have experienced more than could be predicted with the lockdowns, remote learning, cancelled exams, etc. Just stop to think for a moment the impact on our SEND learners with these things. Lots of them don't like sudden change, and these have been sudden, or uncertainties around what's going to happen. And those are all quite significant curveballs, but for SEND youngsters, just having a bus that's on diversion or finding there's a supply teacher in the class can also have a large impact. We can't predict when such things may happen, but we can collectively share to try and help mitigate their impact. So find ways to jointly communicate where things have gone awry. So that could be something as simple as parent teachers pinging emails or a text, or maybe the pupil could have a card system. My own son has a little card system that just says, I need help, or I need space, or I need time. Because if he's struggling at that moment, it all looks the same. It's a struggle, but it may be different reasons why he's struggling. It might just be leave her back off, or it might be come and help me. So just think about how you can do that. Another way to mitigate curveballs is to have an up-to-date one-page profile, which we've mentioned a number of times. But these are really helpful for supply staff or any staff that are unfamiliar with the pupil. Working together as a team is also helpful, as the school and parents can develop a common approach to support learning in a personalised way. It's also helpful where schools link families together and can signpost to parent forums. So I mentioned some of that, linking families together, that don't undervalue the power of those coffee mornings and the peer support that families can give to each other. Okay, up to you, Becca.
Thanks, Roz.
Just before we move on to Becca, can I say that Catherine has mentioned that her school uses a photo booklet and a video tour with the key stage lead. So that's the strategy that they use, which sounds great.
That's really useful. And of course, bearing in mind these days of where we're often having to do things virtually, when families weren't able to visit schools, to have those resources available, videos and walkthroughs, would be useful for the whole school community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roz. So back over to you, Rebecca, and we're fine for time.
Thank you. And on that note, in terms of the videos, I think that one of the things that has come out of the last couple of years is how open we are to actually sharing kind of the inside of what's happening in schools with families, and that's a really useful way of doing that. And one thing that is really helpful for our SEND pupils is if you do a school tour or a visit, you gain all the information, you may come away with lots of questions, and you then have to kind of keep hold of those memories. With a video, you can watch it back as many times as you need to. You can develop any sets of questions that you wish to ask, and then take those back to the teachers in those settings, or your key members of staff, or your parents. So having something you can reflect on and allow that additional processing time is really useful. So I think video tours for schools and visual booklets are absolutely essential. So it's going to spend some time now looking at the one-page profile. So on the right of the screen, you can see an empty one-page profile. And so we're just going to talk about what these profiles are, how they can be used, and how you can develop them to best support your young people. So the first step, and I've mentioned here the needs of an autistic pupil because that's predominantly the cohort that I'm working with, but this is absolutely essential for any young person with SEND, and to be honest, any child, is understanding what their needs are, getting to really know them, what's important to them, and what do they feel that they would like to share with others about their own needs and their own experiences, and how they would like others to relate to them. It's so important that all staff who work with the pupil must understand their needs to know how to support participation and learning. And as was mentioned, that is key for supply staff who may be coming in, rarely, but actually any person who has contact with one of your children with SEND needs to understand what their needs are. It could be that you are the person who greets them as they come through reception in the morning, and it could be a 2 or 3 minute interaction with that young person. But to that young person, that interaction is the way that they start their day. So it is so important that all people who are coming into contact with that young person really understand their needs and the impact that they can have on making them feel safe and secure and accepted. So one way to do this is to create that one-page profile. And you can see in the boxes here, you have the opportunity to put a photo of your young person in the middle. It could be they don't actually want to have their photo included, so they may prefer to do a picture or a character that resembles themselves, that you as a team know who that relates to. Say what their name is, their age, and their communication style. So how are they communicating? Is it verbally? Is it through pictures or symbols? Is it through a system such as PECS or Makaton? And if they're feeling stressed or worried, what are their communication tools? How can they communicate effectively? Think about what's important to them. As a young person in that centre of that team, what's important to them? What are their aspirations? What do they feel they need to have in place to support them? Include aspects such as what their strengths and their talents are. I think in schools we are really conscious all the time of making sure that we are acknowledging their challenges and putting strategies in place, that sometimes we can forget to celebrate what they're really good at, what their achievements are, what their strengths are, and giving them opportunities to share that element with others so that they can celebrate those too. And think about the impact of their well-being and their self-esteem, just knowing that others can share in that experience with them, what they're able to do really well. What their favourite things are. So that will help you to understand what will engage them, what can be motivating for them, what do they like to do and to talk about, and how can you work this into their curriculum so that their special interests are included. What are their fears, their worries, things that they don't like? It could be, for some of our students, that could be busy environments, sudden noises, loud noises, unanticipated social exchanges. So it's thinking about what do they feel that they're worried about, what are their fears and their worries. And again, it's having the young person in the centre, but absolutely working with your families to share what's happening at home. What are their fears and worries that they're sharing with their families at home that, as Ros has said, they may not feel comfortable to share with a teacher or a staff member in the school environment. What are their dreams? And again, it's valuing their dreams. It may be that your young person's dream is to work with animals. So can you then use that to think about their future aspirations? Could they go and explore and have some time looking at farms or animal sanctuaries, or going to a vet's, going to a nature reserve, dog walking, anything, but it could be something that they actually would really genuinely aspire to be. So an interest that could seem very open, for example, I like animals or I like sport, can really open up their world of opportunities for them in the future. Think about what people like and admire about them. So ask them, what do people like and admire about you? That's a chance for your young person and their family to think about what's a really positive characteristic. Are they really funny? Are they really friendly? Are they just really fun to be around? Are they really good at something? And that's something that others can like and see and admire. And then what can you do to help them? So what do they feel they would need support with, and how can you help? And for some of our children, it could be, I need you to think about my transitions and giving me time and space to move before the rest of the group. I might need you to help me to understand things and give me some more time. I might need you to help by representing things visually for me. So that's a framework to work with. And I'm going to share with you a model of a one-page profile, which is a very simple one-page profile created. And this is from the Autism Education Trust, about a 7-year-old boy called Ted. So the words that describe him, he's chosen fun, excitable, and an animal lover. And many of our children can sometimes come up against negativity and not find all those positive words to describe them. So it's helping them to think, how can I be described in a really nice, positive way? And what do my family think of me? What can be shared so that the school staff can see that side of me too? My strengths and talents, so I know lots of animals and I can walk for a long time. So what can you do there? How can you incorporate that into your school day? Can you incorporate movement breaks and walks and more active learning activities and opportunities for him? His favourite things are being outside in nature. So he loves PE. PE is my favourite lesson. So again, those active areas of the curriculum, how can you build on those? Fears and worries are things like noisy and crowded places and going shopping. So already that should alert you as practitioners to what his sensory needs may be. What reasonable adjustments do you need to put in place? For example, in those times we've mentioned, like assemblies and corridors or going to new places, how can you reassure him? My dream is to become a zookeeper. So again, valuing that link. He's used animals as well. So for him, he may work at a zoo, he may become a zookeeper. How can you build that into how you're supporting him and work with his family to share in that vision? What people like and admire about him, they like his drawing. They say that he's funny. So again, what projects can you create between home and school to develop that and to share some of those positive aspects that he can share with you? And what can you do to help me? He's identified, help me get to my safe space or somewhere quiet if I'm upset. And that safe space is absolutely essential for all of our children with SEND. If they're feeling anxious, if they're feeling worried or overwhelmed or cross or agitated, where can they go where they know they are safe, they are comfortable and they are supported? And how can you design that safe space in conjunction with their family? What's their safe space like at home? Do they need to go to their bedroom and go under their covers in their bedroom, in which case they may respond well to having a tent in the classroom or a cozy area? At home, do they need to go for a walk or go and have something to eat to help them to regulate? Could you incorporate an additional snack time or a movement break? What works for them at home, and how can you replicate that in school to help them to feel safe and provide them with sensory regulators to support them to do that? And here's a quote from the late Donna Williams, who was autistic herself. And again, this is absolutely not just for those with autism, but it is for any of those young people with SEND, and it really resounded with me, which is why I wanted to share it. So right from the start, from the time someone came up with the word autism, the condition has been judged from the outside by its appearances and not from the inside, according to how it is experienced. And I think for many of our young people with SEND, this can be what they are experiencing. So to fully understand SEND, it's important to appreciate how our young people experience the world and to listen to what our children are telling us about their experiences. And we must listen to the perspective of our children and young people. And that absolutely includes listening to the lived experiences of their families. What can that tell us, and how as education practitioners can we include those experiences and work together to provide the right overall environment and provision for that child or young person? So the one-page profile, just to summarise, gives you a framework for working together with a family and staff to gain their perspective on the pupil's strengths and the areas of support. Helps you gain the perspective from the pupil themselves, which is absolutely the centre of what we're trying to do in terms of that team around the child. It's a good starting point for understanding the pupil. It can let others know about the pupil's interests, ways of communicating, and areas of support. Many young people with SEND that I've worked with may choose to carry that profile with them. They may have it presented in a booklet or on an iPad, or record it as a video so that they can share that with other people when they want to. And it helps you to share information with the pupil, about the pupil with others as well. So I know we're coming to the end of our time, but just have a quick think about, if you're a professional, do you already use one-page profiles within your setting? And if you do, or if it's something that you're starting to think about, how can you work with your families to ensure that your pupils' views, experience, and aspirations are included? How are you hearing that young person's and family's voice? And if you're a parent or carer, have you been involved in developing a one-page profile with your child's school? I really hope that you have. And if not, is that something that you can now approach the school and say, look, I'd really like to come and share this on this journey with you, and this is what I feel how I could do this and how I could be involved. And how could you share your views on your child's likes or dislikes and their future aspirations? So I'd just like to invite you to share some of those in the chats, if we have the time, Erica.
Just to say, Rebecca, we've had a comment from Sharon, who's mentioned how useful the one-page profile would be in preparation for an EHCP review, or indeed any review of an intervention support for a child.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. And it's also, it's the one-page profile isn't something you develop at the beginning of the year and then you come back to the next year. It's an active working document that is a discussion point that you can revisit regularly. So any opportunity where you're having a discussion with a young person or their family, it's a chance to revisit that one-page profile. And those times that you've identified are absolutely great occasions to do that.
Oh, I think I must apologise. I have a dog that's barking. We've got another one that from Michelle, who says that we find one-page profiles useful when a child moves to the next class or the next school as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another great example of when they can be used. And really, it's making sure that through that transition process, again, you're checking that is an up-to-date profile, but also supporting the place that they're moving to really look between the lines and understand the context of that profile. So how can you explain that further? How can you make sure that the communication behind that profile is effective?
And someone has also, I think it's Shabnam has said that that they're really useful when different staff members come into class, and the students enjoy adding to their one-page profile as well. Someone has mentioned that in their school, they're perhaps not as accessible as they should be, and something like the format that you've presented is really clear. Someone else uses a one-page profile for all SEN and also their pupil premium students, and they share this information with staff using a provision mapping tool that they have in the school, and they update as part of their APDR as well.
Fantastic.
They feel that it could be used more by staff to build relationships with students more.
And on that point, Erica, that that is absolutely key. And one way you can do that is by having one-page profiles as staff members yourself. So I know myself and my team, we've developed one-page profiles in the past, which we've shared with our students. And it may be the things that help us are having a cup of tea, or talking to a friend. Those are things that regulate us and the things that we want to share with others. And that models to your students that this isn't something just for those of you who are requiring additional support. This is a way of sharing that, sharing everything about yourself that you want to be shared. So modeling that for your students can be really powerful and help them to feel, more included.
I think that's a great idea. And in fact, I was reflecting on that as I was looking at the profile and how I'd complete it for myself. We're just about coming to the end of our time. We've got literally 2 minutes left. We do have one question in the chat. So is there anything more you want to add, Rebecca, before we move on?
No, I'm happy. I think we were kind of coming to the end, as you say, and I'll leave that slide up really just to show about what myself and Ros feel about engaging parents and pupils. And as I mentioned before, it's, I've said to professionals, you are the experts in terms of your schools, your teaching, your everyday school life, but we need to absolutely value the parents as the professionals and the experts in their child's lives. And so that's one of the main points that I would ask you to take away.
Absolutely. We'll come to the one specific question in the chat. I think it might be best if we were to email you directly with that. But just as we finish now, I am conscious it is 1 minute to 5. I'd like to thank Rebecca and Ros for their presentation this afternoon. I would ask you, if you are a parent listening, please share the link with your child's school. If you are a teacher listening, please share the link with other teachers. If you are a leader listening, please share the link with other leaders, because I really do think this is such valuable information. In addition to the slides that you've seen this afternoon, there are some additional slides to finish, which we'll send out, and that's just referencing the links to the Ask, Listen, Do leaflets that Ros has already mentioned, and some of the other resources on the SEN Gateway, the Whole School SEN Gateway. They're all freely available, which you can also access, which are linked to working with parents. So on that point, I'm going to say thank you to Rebecca and Ros. Thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you to Anna and me, Anna Marie and Francesca, for hosting, and I hope you all have a pleasant evening. Goodbye.